Thank you very much for giving me the chance to participate in this significant event. I had the chance to do some research on responsibility to protect. I had some projects. I was a member of the research project on Western wars 3 years ago at the University of Warsaw. We started the project devoted to Russian wars. So I would like to share with you some of my thoughts about the concept. For me, the added value of R2P was to be practicality, operationality. So I believe it is one of the most important concepts in the area of human rights after 1989. But at the same time, I'm a little bit pessimistic. And I believe probably we lost the chance to do more. The optimistic version of my statement is that we just lost some energy, but still we can go forward. So just for those who maybe don't know, the R2P was created as a response to some crimes committed during the Balkan Wars, in Rwanda, in Somalia in the 90s. And it was the promise of the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. In 1998, he said that the 21st century should be the century of prevention. So we failed with reaction in the 90s, so we hoped to prevent in the 21st century. It also was the idea contributing to this concept never again, included in the UN Charter of 1945. And as you know, in 2001, the expert report was presented, devoted to R2P. In 2005, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the summit outcome document, which recognized the idea of R2P, and it promised somehow that the UN would continue efforts to implement a responsibility to protect. But at the same time, in most of the discussion in the literature, we are focused on military intervention. But the truth is that in what UN adopted in 2005 is about prevention and reaction in the situation of 4 atrocities: genocide, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, war crimes. There was no change when we talk about the use of force. So those experts' recommendations concerning possible military intervention in the situation of the threat of mass atrocities has been rejected. And it had a meaning, of course, for the next years. So okay, and just one more comment. United Nations Secretary General in 2009, he contributed to the idea in this way that he identified 3 pillars. So responsibility of the state, responsibility of international community to provide some assistance to the state, and pillar 3, so international community should be engaged in the situation when the state is not able to provide protection to the population. After 2005, of course, the concept developed. So first of all, we could refer to quite many reports prepared by UN Secretary General. There were quite many discussions organized by the UN General Assembly devoted to R2P. Security Council adopted around 80 resolutions, including the responsibility to protect, plus UN Office for the Special Advisors on R2P and Prevention of Genocide has been established in New York. So, like in my opinion, also the result was adoption, quite many early warning systems in the United Nations, in other regional organizations. Plus, we could observe that more human rights officers have been included in different United Nations missions in the field, what always helped at least to the early warning. Also on the level of, on the regional level, there are some new solutions, but there is a problem with operationality. Sorry. Okay, so let's try to look at some numbers. Let's compare some numbers of 2006 and 2023. So in 2006, there were 21 million refugees. I mean, people who left their homes. I remember 2015, when it was announced that the level of refugees in the world reached 50 million people, and it was the level of the Second World War. So, like, personally, I was shocked, and I couldn't imagine that, there could be more refugees in this world than during the Second World War. But today, it is more than 100 million people forced to leave their house. Of course, you can say it is a kind of manipulation, because not all refugees are a result of mass atrocities, I'm aware, but still it shows to some extent the humanitarian condition in the world. Every year there are more and more millions of people in humanitarian aid need. We can also easily compare the deaths of combatants and civilians. So from that perspective, we can say that there was no maybe huge contribution of the concept, practically operationality, to the protection of populations in the world. Many atrocities happen all the time. We are witnesses. And now, I'm sorry. We should come back one slide. Now some reasons why we could observe R2P stagnation last years. So a lot of reasons were mentioned yesterday during the discussion. For example, the crisis of multilateral solutions. Divisions between Geneva and New York. When I visited, for example, the office of the Special Advisor against the genocide prevention, I was asked, what is my topic? Serious violations of human rights or mass atrocities? So, of course, serious violations of human rights are covered by Geneva office. When we talk about mass atrocities, it's the competence of New York. So, so many organizations, especially the United Nations, is divided into different sectors. We can afford to provide bigger and bigger humanitarian aid every year to different places. For example, to Gaza, the special agency for Palestinian refugees. But at the same time, for decades, the section concerning prevention of conflicts doesn't work. We are not able to find solutions to many conflicts. It's to some extent easier, it turned out, to provide a humanitarian aid. Of course, we could observe this functionality of the UN Security Council, which can take decisive, crucial decisions in the situation of mass atrocities. Yesterday, the perfect example was Myanmar, also Syria, also Ukraine. So especially when the permanent member is involved in mass atrocities, international community, to be honest, is a little bit limited. And UN Security Council is just dysfunctional. Also, I don't need to explain maybe Chinese position or Russian position, but also the United States, especially during the President Donald Trump, was just not interested in the development of the concept and didn't manifest the support for example, the idea of giving up veto power in R2P situations. Quite many countries supported this idea, but not the United States. When we talk about ICC, We know that the US is not a party, that the US withdrew the signature. Also, during Presidents Bush and Trump, the United States decided to withdraw itself from UN Human Rights Council, which just had an impact on the performance of that institution. So also R2P didn't result in like practical operational prevention mechanisms. So still we are lost when we discuss the issue of prevention. Like states sometimes they don't know what to do. What does it mean to prevent genocide? What does it mean to prevent crimes against humanity? In Europe, I noticed that most of states perceive R2P as a part of their foreign policy. When I used to organize some seminars, for example, in Poland about R2P, or I had some discussions on the European EU level, I could hear it's not the European problem. We have to help outside, but not in Europe. So it just shows that maybe there is not enough awareness and understanding that states are responsible, first of all, for the situation. Plus, crisis of democracy. After 2001, according to Freedom House system at least, every year we have less and less fully democratic states, so which, of course, naturally have been especially interested in pushing R2P in the United Nations, so the less influence. The next slide, please. And now let me refer shortly to the war in Ukraine. On the one hand, we can say international community again failed to prevent mass atrocities after 2004, after annexation of Crimea and the violence on the east of Ukraine. International community for sure could do better and more to prevent atrocities. So we can analyze just the reaction of international community. International community didn't have the influence on the Russian Federation, which of course was and is responsible for protecting civilians and should respect international humanitarian law obligations. From international community point of view, I believe there was a reaction. I'm not so critical because we offered some assistance to refugees on the European Union level, on governmental level. The law was adopted to provide some assistance, but I was also a part of incredible moment in Polish-Ukrainian relations. I mean, like societies. I know many people who just opened their houses for refugees. I know many taxi drivers, you know, who used to drive to the border and helped with the transportation. I know many people who just prepared food in their houses and provided to the railway station, etc., etc. Plus, of course, international community reacted with sanctions, with financial support, and with military support, because in the end, what helped to protect some people and the civilian population, it was like anti-missile defense systems and defensive equipment, military equipment. Of course, it is like the Ukraine job to analyze the situation from R2P perspective, especially. But of course, it is the example of the conflict where civilians are treated as a weapon, in fact, as an instrument of war. Today, horrible picture situations from Gaza, where also civilians are not protected, but used as shields, as the weapon, etc. Please, the next slide. So I wanted to share with you what is the current discussion in Poland, because you can imagine that in Poland we discuss about protection of the population in case of war. and the situation in Ukraine mobilized many groups to think about it. So the discussion started about very practical issues, about air raid shelters. We started to count shelters. We started to renew evacuation plans in case of wars. We also a lot of decisions have been taken concerning anti-missile protection system, because it is something that really helps to protect civilians. But also, we are aware that, of course, education of civilians, preparedness of civilians for that kind of situation should be a part of our educational program. The issue which is not resolved from, let's say, Polish point of view, national point of view, but also international point of view, is the situation under the occupation. Because, for example, in Ukraine, we observed that, we really don't have the access to the occupied territory. I remember that after the Second World War, the Polish lawyer Rafał Lemkin, who coined the word genocide, he included in his concept also existence of international institutions to monitor the situation on the occupied territory. And international community maybe somehow could come back to this kind of idea, because it is for sure the weak point. So to conclude, and I wanted to say that from my analysis, I can say that every situation is completely different. When we think about the protection of the population from these major atrocities, we have to be ready to take other instruments for the situation of Ukraine, let's say Gaza, Sudan, Syria. There are some patterns, especially if when we analyze, for example, Russian approach to the military warfare. There are some patterns which we could identify in Chechnya, in Syria, in Ukraine. So it is important to analyze those patterns and to have some conclusions. But generally speaking, when we talk about prevention, there is structural prevention, so long-term prevention. So of course, education and investing in human rights is crucial. When we talk about operational instruments, so instruments which should be implemented when there is a real threat of mass atrocities, unfortunately, ad hoc basis. I don't believe in one toolbox which can work everywhere in every situation. Plus, from my research, I identified some factors which, generally speaking, contribute to international prevention, to success of international prevention. And it is for sure early involvement. It is the presence on the ground when there are some research projects which shows that when there is UN operation there are forces, at least early warning system works earlier. We have better information. But also the scale, the level of the violence is lower. Plus the question of the strength of international pressure, it depends on actors, of course, the quality and adequacy of instruments, and the question of interest and political will, of course, because very often when, for example, there is no economic interest, powers are not so eager to act. But on the other hand, the positive conclusion may be that, generally speaking, ethical approach to international relations and moral feelings about what's going on in Ukraine or in Gaza really contribute to the pressure which we can express towards governments. And I think it really helps. So thank you very much for your attention.